The sun was already high over the Texas plains, its heat rippling across the endless golden grass. A soft wind stirred the dust and carried with it the scent of wild sage and mesquite. Clara Whitmore guided her mare down a narrow trail that wound through the low canyon near her homestead, a woven basket resting on the saddle beside her. It was her weekly ritual to gather herbs and roots for medicines, something her late mother had taught her when they first settled the land. World was quiet except for the soft clop of hooves and the cry of a distant hawk. Then, faintly, she heard it, a desperate shout carried by the wind. At first, she thought it was an echo, a trick of the canyon, but then it came again, clearer this time, a man's voice, filled with panic. Help! Without hesitation, Clara spurred her horse forward. The cry came from the bend in the river. Where the ground turned dark and soft, she dismounted quickly, heart pounding, and ran toward the sound. There, half sunken in a patch of quicksand, was a man struggling for his life. His arms thrashed wildly, each movement dragging him deeper. The more he fought, the faster he sank. Hold still, Clara shouted. Scanning the ground for something sturdy, she grabbed a thick branch from a fallen mesquite tree and edged closer, testing the soil with each step. Take this, grab it, she called, thrusting the branch toward him. The man's dark eyes locked onto hers. They were sharp even through the mud covering his face. His hand shot out and grasped the branch. Clara leaned back with all her strength, digging her heels into the dirt. The strain burned through her arms, but she refused to let go. Come on, she cried, pulling with every ounce of power she had. Slowly, painfully, he began to emerge, coughing and gasping. With one final tug, he slid free from the deadly mire and collapsed on the bank. Breathing hard, Clara dropped to her knees beside him. He was half conscious, covered in mud and trembling. His clothes were torn, made of leather and beads. Nothing like what local settlers wore. Around his neck hung a carved stone pendant. Clara hesitated for a moment, realizing he wasn't one of the townsfolk, but the thought passed quickly. Whoever he was human, and she had saved his life. Easy now, she murmured, brushing wet sand from his face. His skin was warm beneath her touch, his breathing shallow but steady. You're safe. When he tried to sit up, a sharp pain made him wince. Clara helped him onto her horse and led him back to her cabin, a small log house nestled between the cottonwoods inside. She set him by the fire, wrapped him in a blanket, and fetched water. He didn't speak much, only whispered his name, Tehan. His voice was deep but soft, carrying a quiet strength even in weakness. As the storm clouds gathered outside, thunder rolled over the plains. Clara lit a lantern, its glow flickering across the cabin walls. She worked through the night, cleaning his wounds and feeding him spoonfuls of broth. He watched her with wary eyes, silent but observant, as though weighing her kindness against the danger of trust. When the wind howled through the shutters, she sat by his bedside, watching the firelight dance across his face. He looked peaceful now, asleep but restless, like a man carrying the weight of more than exhaustion. Clara didn't know who he truly was or what fate had led him into the canyon that day. All she knew was that she had saved a stranger, and that, somehow, the course of her quiet life had shifted outside. The rain fell harder, washing away his footprints near the river, as if erasing the past to make way for something new. She didn't yet realize that the man lying in her cabin was not just a stranger, but the son of a Comanche chief, and that her single act of courage had already begun a story that would change both their worlds forever. Morning sunlight spilled through the cracks of the log cabin, painting thin golden lines across the wooden floor. Clara Whitmore stirred a pot of broth over the hearth, the soft bubbling filling the silence behind her. The stranger she had rescued, the man who had given his name only as Tehan, lay resting on a small cot near the window. His breathing was steadier now, the fever breaking after a long, restless night for 3 days. Clara tended to him without fail. She changed his bandages, kept his wounds clean, and coaxed him to eat, though he spoke little. His eyes followed her movements, sharp and alert. As if he was studying her every gesture, there was something about him, a quiet dignity, a calm strength that radiated even in his weakness at first. Clara had been cautious. She knew stories of the Comanche, tales passed between settlers around, campfire stories that painted them as fierce and ruthless. But the man before her didn't match those tales. He was wounded, humble and deeply respectful when he grew strong enough to speak. His voice was low and deliberate. "Why you help?" he asked one morning, his English halting but clear. Clara looked up from her sewing. "Because you were dying," she said softly, "and no one deserves to die alone." He nodded slowly, as if turning the words over in his mind. "You." "Brave," he murmured. His gaze steady. Clara smiled faintly but didn't reply. She was no hero, just a woman who had done what she thought was right. Yet something about the way he said it stirred something deep inside her, something she hadn't felt in years. Recognition over the next few days. A quiet companionship grew between them. They spoke little, but the silence between them was not uncomfortable when Clara worked outside. Tayan insisted on helping. Despite his injury, she tried to stop him, but he only smiled faintly and said, "Work makes strong." Together they fetched water from the well, mended the fence, and gathered firewood. His movements were graceful and sure, like someone deeply in tune with the earth. Sometimes Clara caught him standing on the porch at dawn, looking out over the wide plains as the wind rippled through the tall grass. There was a look in his eyes, a mix of longing and sorrow, as though he were searching for something far beyond the horizon. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Clara asked quietly, "Do you have family waiting for you?" Tayan's expression grew distant after a long pause. He said, "Yes, tribe." Then, looking into the flames, he added softly, "Father Chief." Clara froze for a moment. The realization settled slowly, heavy but wondrous. He wasn't just any wanderer. He was the son of a leader, a man of importance among his people. She didn't press further, sensing that his silence guarded something sacred outside. The wind howled through the trees, and the cabin creaked under its force. Inside, the fire crackled, throwing warm light on their faces. There was a fragile peace in that moment, one neither dared to disturb, but Clara couldn't ignore the unease growing in her chest. She knew the settlers nearby had been on edge for months, fearful of conflict with the Comanche. If they discovered who Tayan truly was, or even that she was harboring an injured native man, there would be trouble. Yet as she looked at him, sleeping quietly by the fire, she knew she couldn't turn him away. The third morning dawned crisp and clear. Tayan stood outside, dressed in clean clothes Clara had mended for him. He thanked her with a solemn bow of his head, then pressed a small carved wooden token into her palm. A hawk, wings spread wide. "You saved life," he said quietly. "I not forget." Before she could answer, he turned and disappeared into the morning mist, his figure swallowed by the plains. Clara stood there for a long time, staring at the carving in her hand. Something told her this was not the last she'd see of him. The air felt charged like the calm before a summer storm, and deep down, she knew that the man she had saved was far more than a passing stranger. He had brought with him the promise of change, and her quiet world would soon never be the same again. The days after Tayan's departure were strangely quiet. The plains stretched endlessly before Clara Whitmore's small cabin, but they no longer felt peaceful. They felt empty. Every morning, she found herself glancing toward the river trail, half expecting to see his figure appear on the horizon. The carved hawk token he'd left behind now hung above her fireplace, a reminder of the stranger she had saved and the connection that had sparked between them in silence and kindness. Life returned to its routine, yet something in Clara had shifted. She found herself smiling more at small things: the sound of the wind through the cottonwoods, the scent of rain, the memory of Tahan's quiet laughter when he tried to pronounce her name. But one afternoon, while she was mending a fence, she heard hoofs pounding in the distance. A dust cloud rose on the horizon, and soon a rider came rushing down the trail. It was Tom Weaver, a local ranch hand and one of her nearest neighbors. His horse was lathered with sweat, and his face was pale. "Clara," he called out, breathless, "you best get inside." Comanche riders were seen by the river this morning. Whole group of them, sheriffs gathering men in town. They think an attack's coming. Clara's stomach turned. "How many?" she asked. "Dozens," Tom said grimly. "Maybe more. We don't know what they want, but they're headed this way." Fear rippled through the settlement that evening. Families boarded up windows, loaded rifles, and gathered their children close. But while everyone prepared for the worst, Clara's instincts told her something different. The Comanche didn't move without purpose, and deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was connected to Tahan. Next morning dawned still and heavy. A low wind whispered through the grass as Clara stood on her porch, the hawk carving clutched tightly in her hand. Then she saw them shadows moving along the ridge, sunlight glinting off painted horses and the spears of mounted warriors. The Comanche had come. The settlers gathered near the edge of town, guns drawn, voices trembling. Sheriff Matt Keegan shouted orders, trying to keep them steady. "Hold your ground. If they cross the creek, we fire." But before the tension could erupt into chaos, a single rider broke from the group and rode forward. Tall and commanding, his horse was black as night, and the feathers woven into his hair caught the wind like flames. Clara felt her breath catch in her throat. It was Tahan. Dismounted slowly, his movements calm and deliberate, and walked toward the town's edge behind him. His warriors waited in silence, watching. The settlers murmured nervously, fingers tightening on their triggers. Clara stepped forward before anyone else could move. "Wait!" she cried. "Don't shoot." She pushed through the crowd, ignoring the sheriff's warning, and walked toward Tahan, her boots sinking into the soft earth. When their eyes met, it was as if the weeks apart had vanished. His expression softened slightly, though his stance remained proud and dignified. "You came back." Clara Whisperetahan nodded. "You saved me," he said. "Now my people come to thank you." The words rippled through the crowd. The settlers stared in disbelief as more Comanche riders approached. Women, children, elders, all carrying gifts, pelts, hand-woven blankets, food, and water. At their head rode Chief Nokona, Tan's father. The chief dismounted and spoke solemnly through his son, who translated for Clara and the others. "You saved my blood. You showed mercy when others would turn away. For this, we bring peace." The air seemed to still completely. The settlers, who had expected war, now stood speechless as the Comanche placed their offerings at Clara's feet. She could barely find her voice. "I don't know what to say," she murmured. Eyes brimming. Town smiled faintly. "Say nothing. Heart already speaks." As the wind carried his words across the open plain, Clara understood the weight of what had happened. Her act of compassion, one born of pure instinct, had bridged two worlds long divided by fear and hatred. That night, as fires burned peacefully across the valley, settlers and Comanche shared food and stories under the same starlit sky. Yet beneath the warmth of that fragile peace, Clara knew something deeper had begun. It wasn't just gratitude in Tahan's eyes when he looked at her. It was something unspoken, ancient and powerful, a bond that neither time nor distance could break. The sun rose gently over Silver Creek, casting a warm glow across the valley where two worlds had once stood divided. The settlers' campfires had burned low through the night, their smoke mingling with that of the Comanche encampment on the opposite ridge. For the first time in living memory, there was no sound of gunfire or fear, only the cautious murmurs of peace. Clara Whitmore stood by the riverbank, gazing across at the Comanche camp where Tahan and his people had gathered. Horses grazed peacefully, women prepared food, and children's laughter carried on the wind, the sight was strangely beautiful proof that her small act of mercy had created something larger than herself yet. Beneath the calm, tension still lingered in the nearby town. Many settlers didn't trust the peace. Whispers spread that Clara had brought the Indians to their doorstep. Some said she was a fool, others said she was a traitor, but Clara refused to be ashamed of compassion. When Taihan's father, Chief Nokona, invited her to their camp to share a meal, she accepted without hesitation. As she rode across the plains, her heart pounded not from fear, but from awe. The Comanche camp was alive with color and sound. Painted hides stretched between poles, fires crackled, and the scent of roasted venison filled the air. The people watched her with curiosity but not hostility. When she dismounted, Tan appeared from the crowd, his expression softening as he saw her. "You come?" he said simply, a hint of warmth in his tone. "I gave my word," she replied, smiling faintly, "and I wanted to see your people." Tayan guided her to the chief's tent, where Chief Nokona awaited. The old man's eyes were sharp but kind, his presence commanding respect. He spoke through Tahan, his voice low and steady. "White woman saved my son. That is not forgotten. You are friend of the Comanche. You are welcome here." Clara bowed her head respectfully. "I didn't save him for reward," she said softly. "I did it because it was right." The chief studied her for a long moment before nodding. "Right heart brings peace. Many hearts like yours. World different." The meal that followed was simple but heartfelt. Clara listened to the rhythmic hum of Comanche songs and watched as Taihan laughed among his people. It was the first time she had seen him truly at ease, yet she also saw the weight on his shoulders, the expectation of a leader's son caught between tradition and change. Later, as the fire crackled and the sky deepened to violet, Clara and Taihan walked along the edge of camp. The air between them was filled with the quiet of things unspoken. "My people respect you," Tayan said. "They see courage in your heart." "I only did what anyone should," she answered. "But not everyone sees it that way. Some of the settlers, they're afraid. They don't understand." He nodded slowly. "Fear is easy, understanding hard." Clara looked up at him, the firelight flickering in his dark eyes. "Then maybe we can change that," she said. "Together." Tayan smiled faintly, his voice low. "Maybe," but even as hope flickered between them, trouble was brewing beyond the horizon in town. Some of the settlers, led by a man named Eli Grant, known for his hatred of the Comanche, were gathering men and weapons. They saw the tribe's presence not as peace but as a threat. "That woman's brought danger to us." Eli spat to the sheriff. "You wait, they'll turn on us the first chance they get." By the time Clara returned home, she could feel the shift in the air. The same people who once traded goods with her now turned their eyes away. Some refused to speak to her at all, but she refused to regret her actions. As night fell, she stood on her porch, watching the faint glow of Comanche fires in the distance. The wind carried the soft rhythm of a drum, steady, eternal, and full of life. Clara whispered into the night, "We're not so different, are we?" In that moment, beneath the stars and the endless sweep of prairie, she felt caught between two worlds, belonging fully to neither, but bound forever to both by a thread of fate spun from mercy, courage, and something deeper that neither she nor Taihan dared name. The uneasy peace between the settlers of Silver Creek and the Comanche tribe held for a few short weeks. The air was thick with suspicion, and every shadow on the plain seemed to whisper of danger. Clara Whitmore felt the weight of it every time she rode into town, where there had once been nods and smiles. Now there were cold stares and whispered words that cut deeper than any blade. "She's the one who brought them here," people muttered behind her back. "Talks with the savages like they're her kin." Clara tried to ignore them, but each cruel glance reminded her of the narrowness of fear. She hadn't meant to bring trouble, only understanding. But not everyone wanted peace. Eli Grant, a rancher known for his temper, saw the Comanche's presence as an insult. "Mark my words," he told the sheriff. "They're just biding time. We strike first, or they'll burn us out." Despite the sheriff's attempts to calm things, Eli gathered a small group of angry settlers one moonless night. They rode quietly toward the river where a few Comanche hunters were camped. Stealing horses and setting fire to their supplies, the attack was quick but cruel. 2 men wounded, 1 boy killed by dawn. The news reached the Comanche camp. Fury spread like wildfire. Drums echoed across the plains, and Tayan stood before his people, his face carved with grief and anger. "My brother's blood stains the earth," he said. "How long must we show peace when they bring only death?" Clara heard of the attack that morning. Her hands trembled as she read the settlers' version on the notice board in town, twisting the truth to make it seem like self-defense. Her heart pounded with dread. She knew what would come next: retaliation. And she knew only one thing could stop it. Without a second thought, Clara saddled her horse and rode hard toward the Comanche camp. The wind tore at her hair and burned her eyes. But she didn't slow when she arrived. The tribe was preparing to ride, faces painted, weapons ready. She jumped from her horse and ran straight to Tayan. "Stop this," she shouted, her voice breaking. "More blood won't bring your brother back." Tayan turned, eyes blazing. "You think I don't know pain? You think peace means nothing when your people die?" Clara stood her ground. "Peace means everything. If you fight, they'll call it proof that they were right about you. You'll lose everything you've built." The warriors murmured. Torn between fury and reason, Tayan clenched his fists, his breath ragged for a long, tense moment. He said nothing then, with visible effort. He lowered his weapon. "What would you have me do, Clara Whitmore?" He asked quietly. "Let me speak for you," she said. "Let me tell them what really happened. It was madness. She knew that. The settlers would not listen, but if she didn't try, there would be war that night." Clara rode back to town alone, her heart pounding like a drumbeat in her chest. When she reached the square, Eli Grant and his men were waiting, rifles slung over their shoulders. "Where have you been, Clara?" Eli sneered back. "With your friends?" She faced him squarely. "I was with the people you attacked. You murdered a child." "Eli, don't you dare call that defense." His face darkened, and the crowd shifted uneasily. "You've lost your damn mind," he spat. "You side with them over your own kind." "I side with what's right," she said firmly, "and you'll answer for what you've done." But justice in Silver Creek was one-sided by morning. Clara was driven from the town. Her name spat like poison, her belongings tossed into the dirt when she rode toward the open plains, unsure where else to go. She saw a group waiting in the distance. Tayan and several Comanche riders approached slowly. Without a word, he reached out his hand and helped her down from her horse. "You cannot stay there," he said softly, "but you are not alone." Tears stung Clara's eyes as she nodded. Realizing the truth, she had lost her home, but gained something far greater, a bond of trust, sealed in honor and sacrifice. As the sun dipped low behind them, the plains glowed gold and crimson. Tayan placed his hand over his heart and said, "You saved my life once, now my people save yours." And with that, Clara rode with the Comanche toward the horizon, leaving behind the world that could not understand her courage, and stepping into the one that finally did. Weeks passed since Clara had been cast out of Silver Creek. The sting of betrayal still echoed in her chest, but the vast plains and the quiet rhythm of life among the Comanche began to heal her wounds. Their world, once a mystery, now felt like a heartbeat she could understand. Every dawn brought new purpose: gathering herbs with the women, tending the horses, listening to the songs that told stories older than any town. The Comanche had not forgotten her bravery. They saw in her something rare, not just compassion, But strength born of truth, even those who once doubted her began to call her Sitsis, meaning the woman who stands between worlds, yet for Clara. The honor was humbling. She hadn't set out to be anyone's hero. She had only followed her heart, and somehow it had led her Heretahan. The chief's son she had rescued was never far in him. She saw a man of both fire and restraint, a leader shaped by duty, scarred by loss, and softened by gratitude. He would often find her sitting near the riverbank at dusk, sketching the way the light touched the water. "You draw the wind," he said one evening. Crouching beside her, she smiled faintly. "I draw what I can't keep." Tayan studied her face. "Then the horizon, the wind does not stay, but it always returns," he said quietly. "Maybe you were never meant to be kept. Clara, maybe you were meant to change what you touch, like the wind." His words lingered long after the sun sank below the hills, but peace, as Clara knew, was fragile one afternoon. Riders arrived from Silver Creek, not soldiers or raiders, but the sheriff himself. Carrying a white cloth on his rifle, he rode slowly into the Comanche camp, his hat in hand. His eyes heavy with guilt. "Miss Whitmore," he said when he saw her. "The town. They know now Eli Grant confessed before he fled, said he was the one who started it all. The raid. The lies the folks want to make it right." Clara's heart twisted for a moment. She couldn't speak. She looked toward Tahan, whose gaze remained steady but guarded. The sheriff continued. "The council's offering you your home back. They say you can return safely. The people are sorry." The words felt hollow against the wind home. It was a word that had changed its meaning for her. She glanced around. The camp. The fires, the children laughing as they raced with painted ponies. This was where she had found belonging. "Not in walls of judgment and fear. I appreciate it, Sheriff," she said softly. "But my home is here now." The sheriff nodded slowly, eyes glistening with understanding. "Then maybe we can start again, not as enemies, but neighbors." When he left, Clara stood beside Tayan. The wind stirring through the grass, he said nothing for a long while, then finally spoke. "You could have gone back. Why did you stay?" Clara turned to him, her eyes warm and steady. "Because you returned for me when no one else would, because this place gave me a second chance, and I'm not walking away from it." That night, under a sky heavy with stars, the Comanche gathered to celebrate the new bond between their people and the settlers. The old chief rose, holding a feather from a red-tailed hawk, a symbol of courage and vision. He stepped forward and placed it gently in Clara's hands. "You saved our son," he said, his voice deep and steady. "You spoke truth when lies filled the air. You saw hearts, not colors. For that, you will forever walk under the protection of the hawk." Tears glistened in Clara's eyes as she bowed her head, the feather trembling between her fingers around her. Drums began to beat, slow, steady, like the pulse of the earth later. As the firelight flickered against her face, Tayan stepped beside her. "The hawk sees both earth and sky," he said. "Maybe that's who you are, caught between both." "But belonging to both," Clara smiled through her tears, looking out into the vast, open night. "Then maybe," she whispered, "I've finally found where I'm meant to fly." And as dawn rose over the plains, gold spilling across the horizon, a hawk soared above them. Circling once before vanishing into the light, it was a sign. They said a blessing for Clara Whitmore. It was something more. It was freedom, the kind born not of escape, but of becoming everything she was meant to be.